All right. So as you know, and we talked about this last week as a joke, I said, well, it wasn't really a joke because I did have a dream, which was such a nightmare of NATO going into Greenland. And I know it's because I was, I'm so focused on these geopolitical issues. And as small as the army is, because it's not like a massive army, but then it's still NATO going into Greenland. And it makes you wonder, what do you say? Do you say NATO has gone into Greenland, or Europe has gone into Greenland and France has sent soldiers and Denmark sent soldiers and so on? Is this the way you talk about it? Because the leading NATO member is the United States, and that's a conundrum if ever there was one. And we didn't get through to Ghana, to my brother and colleague, Gabby Asari Ochero Darko. But I do have an email from one of his team members. And it is what we thought, and no service. And so that we will do this interview. We'll have a chat with Gabby another time on the campaign to make Africa borderless. All right? So we'll do that. But today we're honored to be joined, and we have been telling you about him all morning, by Vijay Prashad, historian, journalist, and political commentator, Institute for Social Research. He has been looking closely on Venezuela, the long-running U.S. assault on Venezuela's sovereignty and social project. This assault, which analysts trace back decades, including Vijay Prashad, has included multiple coups, economic coercion, sanctions, diplomatic isolation, and of course, so we have been witnessing that. We've been talking about that in this space. Vijay joins me from Chile. Good morning, Vijay Prashad. Thank you so much for joining us on the Africa Forum this morning.
Every day.
All right, I'm not hearing him. Are you there, Vijay? All right, let me do this again. Are you hearing me, Vijay?
I'm hearing you loud and clear.
All right, now I am hearing you loud and clear.
No worries.
Yeah. So we've been looking at and listening to what you have been saying. One of the first persons I went to look for when all of this unfolded on the 3rd of January was actually what you were saying. And I did find something. It was very short. And I said, yes, because this is what we were thinking. And usually when we're on the same page, we're in the right place. So thank you so much. You've argued, and I've seen this in some of what you have written, that the U.S. war in Venezuela did not begin with January 3, but that it goes all the way back to 2001. What is different now? Because there is a whole new way, narrative, waves of narratives, if you will, coming from so many different places. It's almost confusing in the space through this. What is different now? I think I lost him. I think I lost Vijay. I literally heard the phone off. So can we do this again? I think I just lost him there. Tell me what's happening. We lost him, I'm sure. All right, so I'm going to try and get Vijay back online. As I said before, he's in Chile, and the connection should be okay. So let's see. It's not going to be one of those mornings. It's not going to be one of those mornings. I will not allow it to be. And after this, we have to go to the United States, which, well, it's a little bit close. It shouldn't be a problem. So let me see. if we can get VJ back online. All right. I think we do have him back online. VJ Pashut. All right. There you go. I'm not quite sure what happened there, but we lost you for a moment. Mm-hmm.
Let's just call it sabotage and be done with it, okay? No, what I was saying to you is that the United States at one point was able to absorb the goods and services produced everywhere, including from the Caribbean. It was able to, afford holidays for its citizens who could go as tourists and so on. This has become difficult for the U.S. It's no longer a manufacturing power. It's no longer a major power that can buy goods, whether raw materials or finished goods. That position has been taken over by Asian economies. The window for it is closing, and wants to use whatever aggressive military force it has available to secure places like Venezuela, Greenland, and so on. And they say directly, before the Chinese get there. You don't need to have me interpret anything. They say it directly, before the Chinese get there. Mr. Trump, why do you need to go and wage war in Greenland, of all places? 50 times the size of colonialism is. Denmark, tiny. Greenland, 50 times. In fact, Greenland, the size of the United States. Let's leave Venezuela for a second. Why Greenland? Mm-hmm. Mr. Trump says directly, because we need to get there before the Chinese. And we have the military force now to do it. The window is closing. Fire your guns.
Mm-hmm. So bottom line, this is not about Venezuela. This is not necessarily about oil. We have to view this in a way you say.
Well, it is about oil, but not exactly as we often believe it to be about oil. It's about oil. Venezuela has the world's largest reserves of oil. United States doesn't need Venezuelan oil. What it needs is that all the oil around the world, be its oil wealth or the profits in oil, be held in dollars. That's called a petrodollar market. What's been happening, U.S. sanctions against countries like Iran, against Russia, against Venezuela, these are big oil producers. As a consequence of these sanctions, well, these countries can't hold their wealth in dollars. It's not possible. So rather than a strictly petrodollar market, you're seeing other currencies enter the petro space. So, whether it's petro rubles or it's going to be petro reals or whatever it might be, a problem for the US dollar, because the United States runs enormous deficits and it requires influxes of money periodically to make sure that the deficit is just not sitting, on an island somewhere where nobody, where somebody says, well, give me my money back, and the US can't. It needs liquidity. It's a kind of global Ponzi scheme. And the petrodollar market is the largest influx of money into you really prevent. But the other thing is, it also wants to use its muscle. And again, they've said this directly, to make sure the Chinese understand their place. I'm speaking to you from Santiago, Chile. We had an election. We have a very right-wing president coming in. But the largest trading partner of Chile in terms of raw materials is China, not the United States. So Chile cannot stop buying and selling from China. But the United States wants to make it clear that buy what you want, but you are not going to dictate the politics in the country. That's the role of the United States. And I must say, to see the behavior of the Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago shows this directly, where you have to bend your knee to the United States out of fear more than anything else.
What does that say about sovereignty? Are we seeing a transactional? Let me put something in context. We we've heard from, so this armada was gathering in, as you know, in the Caribbean waters for the longest while. CARICOM didn't say anything, and when they finally did, they talked about the Caribbean being a zone of peace. But as you've pointed out, with so many coups and overthrowing of governments and wars and all the way to slavery in the Caribbean waters, it has never been a zone of peace. But this is where CARICOM came down on. And then we have yesterday, Marco Rubio met with Jamaica's Prime Minister, and if I don't know if you've seen the press release, it talks about security, and the Jamaican the people, a lot of the people in Jamaica are almost sending a warning to the Prime Minister, if you will, to say, do not anger the United States. Bruce Golding, the former Prime Minister, was on my proud strident against what Donald Trump and his administration have done and continue to do in Venezuela. But he said to me, I can say this, but Andrew Holness cannot say this. Can you imagine if Andrew Holness said this, what would have happened to Jamaica? And I asked him about whether or not sovereignty was transactional then, and he said no. So your own thought on this, looking at what's happening in the region, how Caribbean, Latin American countries?
Well, I mean, look, I'm very, very sensitive to the fact that in the Caribbean there are quite, in terms of demographics and scale, small countries that have a host of problems. And, it's not that the United States hasn't intervened into these countries, going back to the seizure of Puerto Rico and initially Cuba, and then the coups that the United States formed in Grenada and so on. It's not that I'm not sensitive to that. I mean, it's not a theoretical issue for Caribbean countries when they are faced with such a powerful country as the U.S. Of course, we're very, fulfilled with admiration for the government in Cuba, for the Cuban Revolution, which has withstood pressure from the United States for 7 decades, standing up, defying the United States, declaring its sovereignty to be the most important. That you have nothing to worry about, but it's also not true that you don't have an example in Cuba in the way it has stood up to the United States. On the other side of it, I mean, look, it's about time a discussion starts again about West Indian Federation, regional conversations. CARICOM is not really the institution that you need. Yes. It doesn't have the kind of politics that are required. And I wrote a cricket team suffers because West Indian consciousness is suffering. You've got 2 great West Indian institutions, the University of the West Indies and the West Indian cricket team. And that's it. I mean, there should be so much more. You can't have a group of small countries, stuck in the vise. Above you, this United States is very on the war path. And then, these enormous opportunities before you from Asia, but you don't have the political will to navigate it. And it's very difficult for, Guyana to do it, or Trinidad and Tobago to do it. I mean, look at Guyana. Guyana is being, in a sense, sandwiched by ExxonMobil. I mean, ExxonMobil has used the Essequibo oil find to basically trigger a war between Venezuela and Guyana. There is no problem between Venezuela and Guyana. I think it was completely inflated. This saw this as an incredible lever. It was almost like a parody novel of the 19th century of how the imperialists come and put 2 people against each other. They don't really have problems with each other. So, there's got to be a political will in the Caribbean. Obviously, when a former prime minister says the current sitting prime minister can't say these things, that's a sign that sovereignty or dignity has been compromised. I mean, history with when Manley was the prime minister, he stood up for the bauxite. He said that we need not Jamaican sovereignty, but we need an international bauxite consortium, and they were undercut by Australia. But at the time, Manley wasn't just thinking about Jamaica. He was thinking about the third world. He was thinking about Jamaica's place in the third world. That's grand thinking at the scale of sovereignty, at the scale of a member nation of the United States nations. It doesn't matter how small you are, the size of your pop. You have a vote in the UN. And that was what people like Michael Manley were thinking when they said, well, we got to think bigger than the size of our island. And I'm afraid what's happened to a lot of politics today is people they don't have the confidence. And maybe that has to do with the fact that they don't have the movements behind them. They just have an election machine.
And at that point, this is what we're staring in the face here in Jamaica and if you will, in the Caribbean. What can Caribbean countries learn from what has happened to Venezuela? And I do want to come back to the wider picture that you're telling us to look at this in the wider context. But this U.S. war on Venezuela, what can we learn? To what extent is this a warning, if you will, to other countries within the region?
Let me put it this way. I would say that Prime Minister Kamla Prasad Besesar in Trinidad and Tobago has made a strategic calculation. Trinidad and Tobago, as you all know, is an oil-producing country. It also requires a lot of investment to upgrade its oil facilities. They have deteriorated over time and so on. She is seeking to make a kind of oil alliance with somebody. And I think she has changed her political with the United States, hoping that the U.S. is going to come in and invest in Trinidad and Tobago and make it a kind of Kuwait on the Caribbean. But I would caution her, because 2 days after the kidnapping of Nicolas Maduro, the president of Venezuela, Mr. Trump organized a meeting where he called in the oil executives. And the executives from the leading oil companies, including Chevron, which has been the most, to invest in Latin America. He had this meeting where the heads of oil companies said, we simply don't see the need to invest in these countries. I mean, they are not going to invest in Trinidad. If there's an investment, it's going to be minuscule. It's not going to be a major investment. Again, we have the numbers from Greenland. Let's go back to Greenland.
Yes.
Greenland is a major country, 2.3 million square kilometers. Despite the fact that there's a U.S. base there, have invested some $100 million a year. The Canadians, who obviously are have a much closer relationship to Greenland because of the large Canadian mining companies, have invested $700 million. Well, the Chinese showed up, did some studies and said, we can invest over $1 billion, no problem. And then the United States put pressure on Greenland and Denmark to say to the Chinese, we're not interested in. Sure, that's what Kamla Prasad Besesar and others are calculating. They are hoping that the United States, if you kiss up to Donald Trump and any American president, that somehow miraculously money is going to come into your country for investment. It's just not. And do you know why? They don't have it. The billionaire class in the United States is not paying tax. They are not reinvesting money into corporations. What they're doing is they're giving out profits. They are not taking investment. They're giving out profits for consumption by their elites. That's a big problem. They don't have the money to invest in Trinidad, certainly not in Guyana to scale. They don't have the money to invest in Jamaica. If you tie your cart to the US donkey, it's not going to pull you very far. That's just a fact. And there are other animals out there that are running much faster that you might want to consider,
Well, this is to make, Because Caribbean countries are now tying their cards to that very donkey, which is the U.S. And it especially, well, I know Jamaica is doing that, and I'm looking at how the manipulation or the threats, if you will. When we hear Barbados coming out and saying, well, we're having conversations on whether or not we should take deportees, immigrants in, and you have and other countries have already said that. I know this is something that I think Jamaica, I think it's a hurricane that probably is not forcing Jamaica's hand on this. But obviously this was one of the asks of the U.S. government of Caribbean countries. Hence, I don't know if you've heard that there was a list of 75 and how many Caribbean countries. I know you must have heard that. A list of 75, how many Caribbean countries are on that list in terms of immigrant visas. This is everything to them. Jamaica, none, no less. So the point to be made then is getting in bed with the United States. I hear you saying this is not necessarily the best thing to do right now, but what is the choice in the short run? Because it seems there's not.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, because I'm saying it seems there's hardly any choice.
No, but that's to Jamaica. For instance, what has Jamaica been doing? Jamaica is in a way the heart of the Chinese Belt and Road Initiative, just as an example.
They're being pushed out of that, VJ. They are being pressured out of that, and I tell you, they are about to cave.
Yeah, that's exactly the case. I mean, you have somebody saying, look, we want to come in and build your transportation networks. You live in Jamaica, port system desperately needs an upgrade. And by the way, when I first read that, it's going to be a highway scheme, I was a little disappointed. I thought, it should have been a train scheme. Train is is an infinitely more democratic form of transportation because you don't have to buy a car. You just need to get a ticket. And if you bring the prices down of trains, it's such a democratic form of transportation. North-South Jamaica, you're connected by a high-speed train. So good for the island's democracy. People can travel for holidays to meet their family. It's an incredible project. Anyway, it was decided that it should be a highway, which I think was a really big mistake. But anyway, forget that. I'm not going to forget. I'm going to keep saying that because
you are right.
I love trains so much, and I'm so disappointed. Anyway,
you're right.
But there was a project, a very large project, and you were for the first time in a generation or more going to have created, which not only has a democratic influence because it allows people to move around their own country, but it also allows goods and services to move at a much faster rate. And I know that once the transportation system would have been upgraded, there would have been conversation about improving internet access. And we know that 60% of global services are transacted through digital space. So if Jamaica had improved internet, that would be amazing. For all of that could have been good. There was actually money on the table. So why would you say to money on the table, go away for political reasons? We prefer to build a military base rather than have a good transportation and internet system.
May I remind you?
That's a choice that.
May I remind you of something? Sorry to interrupt, but may I remind you of something? Because let's go back to the petrodollar. Let's go back to Petrocaribe. Let's go back to Hugo Chavez and the trade deals. We're talking about oil here, right? And how Jamaica shot itself in the foot by breaking that agreement in favor of the United States.
Yeah, I mean, so Hugo Chavez comes to power through a democratic election, 1998. He takes office in 99. They write a constitution. 2001, he welcomed to buy our oil. We're not throwing you out, but you have to give us more out of the oil than you're taking, which, by the way, was exactly what Manley and company was saying about the bauxite to the bauxite companies. It's the same language.
Yes.
It's the language of the new international economic order of the third world. It's the same language. That's all Chavez said, but he said it in 2001. There was no Soviet Union to protect him. He says this, and the oil companies, some of them stuck out. Fine. It's their choice. They were not thrown out. Then Chavez says, look, Venezuela owes a historic debt to Haiti. Because the Haitian Revolution protected the Venezuelan, or actually the northern South American revolutionaries like Simon Bolivar and so on, and in fact helped them fight against Spanish rule. And because these people in the Haitian Revolution assisted the Simon Bolivar and his army, and because Haiti has been so badly attacked by the United States and the Europeans, it's been impoverished. There have been coups against Aristide and so on. Hugo Chavez said that we are going to start a scheme to provide much lower priced oil into Haiti initially. I was there when he announced this, and then he said, well, why just Haiti? Let's call it Petrocaribe. They are all trying in their own ways, different ways, to exit from the legacy of slavery. Yes. And so that was it. He said, that's why we're doing it. We're not doing it to make money. In fact, we're going to lose money. That's fine. But we're doing it for world history.
Yes.
Because we're doing it to counter the history of enslavement, the brutality of enslavement. And so countries benefited enormously. Haiti benefited in that period enormously. Well, why would you turn your back putting its thumb on the scale? Once, twice, 3 times. How many times are you going to fall for that? And I want to say this again. Part of the reason why countries like Jamaica buckle to the United States is you don't.
Shard, geopolitical analyst, and we're looking seriously at the images operation, if you will, in Caribbean waters, but connecting this to the global, within the global context, because this is not just about the Caribbean. So Vijay, there has to be a Caribbean voice. That's a consensus. What is stopping Caribbean people, whether it's governments or people, from doing this?
I'm going to take a slightly, I feel when I look back at the whole history of the West Indian Federation, that the anchor of this debate was the Caribbean left, was the left-wing forces, in particular in the so-called Anglophone Caribbean, in particular. It was the presence of the left. If you look at the English Caribbean, it's very difficult to use language here because I'm trying to. The point
we understand.
It's the sort of Anglophonic Caribbean.
Yes.
If you look at the main figures of Caribbean unity, they all come from either the Marxist or some variant of the left, including the very great George Padmore, who becomes one of the great Pan-Africanists and is an advisor to Kwame Nkrumah in Ghana. People like C.L.R. James, Sylvia Wynter. I mean, but they also happen to be the central voices of Caribbean unity. Now, in my opinion, this left never really recovered from the overthrow of the government of Maurice Bishop in Grenada. Never recovered from that. It was not able to take, let's say, inspiration from any other place. I mean, it is very interesting that when C.L.R. James republished Black Jacobins in the 90s, time before the New Jewel movement, when James republished it, he called the afterword to the new edition From Toussaint Louverture to Fidel Castro, He drew a line from Haiti to Cuba, but it doesn't go through any of the largely English-speaking islands. The geography doesn't exist. There is no Jamaica or his own Trinidad and Tobago. It is interesting that on the one side, the leading voices, including C.L.R. James, come from the English-speaking Caribbean, calling for unity at a West Indian level. At the same time, it is very interesting that the example of these countries, shows a lack of movement toward the left. The only country of this kind where the left did prevail in spurts was the history of Chedi Jagan and the ability to really shift the politics of independence struggle to the left. So part of the problem today is that the voices that are mostly mainstream, the kind of neoliberal, intellectuals of the Caribbean, they seem less interested in a kind of political unity. They are more interested in things like trade and investment and so far institution. They don't need anything beyond CARICOM. So, you have lots of people that I read in your newspapers and intellectuals who publish books, and most of it is pretty dull because they are thinking about, how do we improve our trade with the United States? So, how do you kickstart growth in Jamaica? So for them, CARICOM is fine because it's exactly what they need. But if you want to ask the question, the problem, the real axial problem, the main problem is enormous wealth inequality. And this wealth inequality combined with a lack of any dynamism in the economy is just not going to get things going. There's no way to start growth. With this situation, you've got to think about regional economies. You've got to think about, what can the West Indies produce as the West Indies? If the Europeans could produce a, maybe it's a shipping line, something that you think about this is something, if we had thought about this in the 1990s and 2000s, this is something Venezuela in that decade could have financed because they had the oil money for it and they could have financed some kind of West Indian thing. But because they come outside the West Indian, this Anglophonic idea of West stuff, that was not his worldview. He was thinking about Bolivar and his debt to Haiti. He wasn't thinking about, the West Indian Federation, or he wasn't thinking about the institutions of West Indian unity. When they created ALBA, which was the Bolivarian area of the Americas, several West Indian countries joined ALBA. Comrade Ralph, as he likes to call himself, was one of the leading figures in really about the Bolivarian countries. It was about the northern part of South America. It wasn't thinking about West Indian unity. So part of this is a failure of intellectual thought. Part of it is lost opportunity. But I think the real thing that has to be put on the table is that new agendas need to be created for countries even within, like Jamaica. Like, what is the political debate? I mean, if you're just debating then you've lost the plot. I mean, then all you're going to do is arm the police more and have more people shot to death. You're not dealing with crime. You're dealing with fear.
Yeah, and that is a reality. We deal with the isness of things, and that is what is now in Jamaica. It's interesting because we have had discussions with colleagues out of Trinidad and Tobago who are also sounding the very, hope it is not a death knell, but it is beginning to sound that way. And talking about death knell, what about the institutions? Let me go, because you mentioned earlier, for example, the United Nations and the vote at the United Nations. But there's a narrative out there now, and it is in some of our own very spaces. I've been saying it myself, that we're seeing a collapse of these institutions as we saw pre-1930s, the invasion of Manchuria by Japan, the invasion of Ethiopia by Italy, that we're seeing a similar situation, whether it is social or political or otherwise, but the institutions that are in place with the so-called rules-based order, that we're seeing a dismantling of these to include the United Nations. What's your thinking on that?
Well, I'm actually lapse of these institutions, because one of the things that the UN did, which the League of Nations didn't do, was the UN bifurcated itself to I think it's good, because what they did was, on the one side, the UN encompassed all the previous agencies and created new agencies. I mean, imagine Gaza today without the UN, UNESCO, without these groups there, the Migration Organization, the Food Organization, World Food Program. Mm-hmm. I mean, we'd have enormous catastrophes in the world today without the UN agencies operating. They do incredible job. I was in the Sahel region of Africa about, 5-6 years ago, and literally at the crossing point of the Sahara, there's an office of the International Organization of Migration. There are, sincere people ready to cross the Sahara, like myself, completely crazy thing to have done. They hand out to you dark glasses and they tell you to be careful, drink water, things like that. I mean, the side of the agencies must never be, I think, made light of. They do really important work with very little money. The other side of it is the political side. And that's the political office of the Secretary General. That's the UN security. There is less the UN. And it's the kind of divided geopolitics we have. I mean, we have an ugly divided geopolitics. I mean, right now, the United States and its allies, the NATO countries, account for over 75% of world military spending. That's an incredible number. Yes. The Chinese account for almost nothing compared to that, almost nothing. And so in the UN Security Council, the United States told what to do. You can see that in their attitude. The Chinese are sitting there, the Russians are sitting there, the Indians, Brazilians, other big countries saying, let's follow international law, let's do this, let's do that. And the United States does whatever it wants, whatever it wants. I mean, this attack on Venezuela violated so many international treaties, including the immunity for heads of state. And just to say this quite bluntly, Nicolas Maduro from Venezuela, that's a violation of the head of state immunity. The head of state immunity can only on one occasion be overridden, and that is if there's an International Criminal Court warrant. While Nicolas Maduro was being kidnapped, there was a head of state in the United States who has an International Criminal Court warrant. He was not arrested by the United States. That's Benjamin Netanyahu of Israel. That means double the United States violated about international law. It's not that the United Nations is failing. It's that the United States has failed all of us.
And so what is, if there's, and miraculously, if there's no change to this trajectory that we're on, I don't think it is, for example, it is by accident that Mark Carney in China yesterday or the day before said, this deal that we're signing, it is good for us. It will help us with the coming down on his head and so on. And he's saying that just a few days before Davos. I think that all of this is pretty strategic. So obviously there's something, whether it is a global reset that King Charles, or at the time Prince Charles, announced at Davos in the early 2019s or 18s, and that this thing is on a roll. So that obviously, for me, just looking on this as a geopolitical analyst myself, I don't see where there's going to be a change. So what does that mean for institutions and organizations like the United Nations, even politically? And this is why I mentioned Japan earlier. And because Japan invaded Manchuria, Italy looked on, the League of Nations did nothing and said, well, you can't do anything about this. We are the big guys. And so you drop mustard gas on Ethiopia. It's beginning to look like this, like that period to me. This is the point I'm making.
Yeah, no, I want to underline the word ugly. It looks really ugly. It looks ugly. And I can see why people would feel distraught and so on. I just don't want to throw the United Nations out yet, because I think there are some changes taking place in the world order that are taking a little longer than I'd hoped. We published a dossier last year called Churning of the World Order. We think the world order is churning. We think there's a lot of Mark Carney's statement that he made sitting across the table from President Xi Jinping in Beijing. Not just that, in December of 2025, while Trump was saying, we are going to exercise the Monroe Doctrine, the Western Hemisphere is ours, while he was saying all that, Canada released a document, quite quietly, in fact, I would say they released it quietly. It was a text about the Arctic Passage. Canada is one of the leaders in the Arctic Council, which used to function until the Arctic Council quite stupidly chucked out Russia, which has the largest Arctic coastline, and therefore nullified it. But Canada plays a big role in Arctic negotiations. Anyway, they released this document. So what was this document? I'll guarantee you there was no mention of this in the Jamaican press. But this is an important document, because the word that you used a few minutes ago, sovereignty. It said that Canada must exercise sovereignty in the Arctic. Now, the United States used to have carte blanche. They could go, their ships could ride through the Arctic waters of Canada without taking permission. Then a few years ago, the Canadian government said, no, look, you can't just come into the waters. You have to inform us in advance. So you don't need to take permission. They use the word sovereignty, and it is beginning to smell like the rules might change, and that Canada might say to the United States, in fact, you have to take prior permission before your ships can enter our sea lanes. You can't just inform us. You have to take permission. The word sovereignty in the text is fighting, because it looks like Canada is saying we want to exercise our right to the Arctic in the same way as Greenland and Denmark should be allowed to the sea lanes in the Arctic. United States does have sea lanes, but they start and finish up above Alaska. Beyond that, they don't have any of their own sea lanes. So this is interesting, that at the same time as we're saying, well, it looks pretty miserable, the U.S., they are not facing any consequences. I agree. There was no consequence at the UN Security Council. But the consequences are creeping up on them, because here's Canada saying, we want to make a good deal. And this is the same Canada, different prime minister, mind you, but the same Canada that arrested the daughter of the owner of Huawei, who was the chief financial officer, and held her in prison because they were instructed by the United States to do that. And now he's sitting Mark Carney is sitting in Canada, in China, saying to the Chinese, let's do a deal. And he's telling the United States, you don't have free access to our waters. So I'm saying to you that it's true, the institutions, it's going to take time, but the changes are happening and the Caribbean cannot be left out of those changes.
And this is a critical point. I'm sorry we don't have much more time. We have about 10 minutes. But this is a critical point in where the Caribbean stand. Because I was saying earlier this morning, we can't just be observers and analysts. We must come up with solutions. And I think, we can't be too late, I think we were too late in responding to the Armand and the biggest warship in the world, the USS Gerald Ford in the Caribbean seas. I think we were too late for that. Trinidad and Tobago came out very, very early to support it, and everybody else just went silent. So we can't be too late. But I wanted to ask you something else about Mark Carney, because what do you make of the fact that he, on the plane back to, I think he's heading to Davos. I think he went, I don't know if it's UAE, and then on his way to Davos. But somebody in his team tweeted that he's been asked by Donald Trump to sit on the board of, is it called the Board of Peace? The Board of Peace, and when Trump, I don't know if you saw that presser where Trump was leaving to go on Friday to go on the helicopter. He was asked, "What do you think about what Carney said and the deals?" And he said, "Oh well, So he seemed very sedated, if you will. And then this reach out for Carney to be on this board. What do you make of that?
I mean, Trump is an interesting character. Now we're entering a slight bit of psychological analysis, because I think he is the kind of person with extremely shallow self-esteem, and he doesn't like his feelings hurt. Many years ago, a man of the right wing took me onto the veranda. Me, Vijay, we read what you write. It's okay. You can write what you want. But if you make fun of us, be careful. It just shows you that they have an extremely shallow sense of dignity. They don't want you to make fun of them. Trump doesn't like to lose. He likes to win. And in this case, I think he's making, as they say, lemonade out of lemons. I mean, so what? He's going to put Carney on this thing. There will be so much pressure from Carney's own party for them not to part imperial exercise. I mean, there are sections of even Carney's party that are going to say this is an occupation, further occupation of Gaza. This is hardly a way forward. Let's see what happens. But I think this is Trump trying to say, look, we are still relevant. I mean, it actually makes the point well. He goes to China to get an economic deal, and the United States gives him the fruit of a military force. No economic deal. What is Canada going to do? This great council of peace? I mean, there's nothing there for Canada. Mr. Carney has to worry about the economic problems in Canada. Canada is a country struck with a contradiction. It's a major mining company, exploits the entire third world, the largest mining companies domiciled in Canada, and yet Canadians like to believe that they are the nicest liberal people. You can't be a nice liberal people and bury trade unionists to Papua New Guinea. I mean, these two things can't be. You can't be a nice liberal person and have Barrick Gold be domiciled in Canada, whose head of state was whose CEO, Peter Monk, was one of the first to ask for Hugo Chavez to be couped and overthrown. I mean, you can't have the two things, and Carney is going to have to straddle those two things. It's very interesting. Canada has a large population from the English-speaking Caribbean. I've often thought, population. But to your question about not being left behind, I mean, one thing I will say to you, for instance, is that it would be very important somehow to find the means to set up a West Indian think tank, a West Indian research institute. that actually looks into what is already happening in the way of integration through trade and other things, and then proposes credible alternatives to this hub and spoke to the United States and to Europe. Where there's much more internal trade, much more internal integration. We need a voice, an intellectual voice from the Caribbean. That's one way to go forward.
Point well taken. I'm so sorry that we're totally out of time, Vijay, but thank you so much because you've always made yourself available to be on this program. We value your opinion and your perspectives.
It was so great. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much, my brother. I'll tell them where to find you. I know where to find you. Thank you so much, Vijay Prashad. All right.
Bye.
We are appealing to you, IRIE FM's Hurricane Melissa Relief Drive, to give generously to the IRIE FM 11 Cocoa Relief Drive. People in affected areas urgently need rice, flour, sugar, cornmeal, non-perishable food items, oats, crackers, etc., canned food, grill, and so on, tarpaulins, solar lights, battery or solar-powered radios. Personal hygiene products are also welcome. You can drop your donation here at IRIE FM Coconut Grove, that's right here in St. Anne, or at 1B Courtney Walsh Drive in Kingston. We'll get your donation to those who need it. As a matter of fact, the team is out on the road right now taking donations into areas that are in need. They left pretty early this morning. When I came in, they were coming, so they have gone into some of the areas where our brothers and sisters are really in need. A small donation from you will make a big impact on somebody's life. The IRIE FM 11 Cocoa Relief Drive. Let's get Jamaica back on its feet quickly and make things IRIE still. Remember now, we do not need any more donation of clothing. We do not need any more water. No more clothing, no more water. But please, rice, flour, sugar, cornmeal, non-perishable food items like crackers and oats, canned food like sardine and mackerel, tarpaulin, solar light if you have that, battery or solar-powered radios, personal hygiene products are welcome. So help us if you can. Black Mirror earlier, when I was talking about how morbid we have become, and the extent to which voyeurism, coupled with this morbid nature that seems to now be almost innate. I mentioned a show that and thank you so much, Andrew, for giving me the title. It is from the Black Mirror series, and it is White Bear. And you sent that before, you said the rest, so I missed that. So White Bear, yeah, that's the one, White Bear from the Black Mirror series. Thank you so much, Andrew. Yeah, I'm seeing it now. White, yeah, definitely. That's it. If you get a chance, watch that. When I saw it first, it was like, wow, I know we're getting there, but we're there. This digital dystopia that we feared is where we are now. And it's a sad foundation. Seminar, Theories in International Relations, Seminar in International Relations, Global Restructuring, Race, Nation, State, and International Relations, and on International Relations and the Caribbean. He specializes in areas within the international political economy, international relations, and political theory. Professor Hilburn Watson, brother, once again on the Africa Forum, we appreciate your time.
Thank you very much. I'm delighted to join you this morning again. Thank you.
So much has happened since we spoke last time, and we want to get into some of that. But we have been reading, and thank you for sending me the information from your colleague, a document from your colleague, William Robinson, the Venezuela. This a detailed, a thoughtful article of NACLA. Thank you so much for sending this, because this was so helpful in my research, just going through the many, many documents that we had to go through. So much information out there, Prof, about what's happening, about whether this is a global reset or geopolitical shifts or so on. The people are really confused. Putting on, what would you advise to kick things off our listeners who are researchers themselves? How would you advise that they go about sifting through so much information, misinformation, and disinformation?
Yes, there is a lot of information out there. A lot of disinformation is also evident. But I think that we need to keep in mind that we're seeing a number of fundamental changes. Noting that where we are today signals the collapse of the post-war World War II international order. You can see this in the Trumpian disregard for international law. We can see what people have called multilateralism under great stress, if not a departure from that, so to speak. The normalization of the use of force, because we are at a point where capitalism, global capitalism, has reached a point where many of these transnational money than they know what to do with, and they don't find any real profitable investment opportunities out there. So the rules-based international order is standing in the way of what they would like to do. Now, a second key point here is what some call a revival of the Monroe Doctrine. This is what Trump wants to call the Monroe Doctrine, insisting that the Western Hemisphere belongs to the United States. This within a couple of weeks ago, sending a warning to neighbors in the Caribbean and in Latin America at large that in effect we can read the intervention in Venezuela as a kind of project to impose discipline on their particular perspective, or let's say on the order that they have in mind, informing regional leaders and others that Cuba, the U.S. is ready and willing to use force to get its way. Mm-hmm. Now, you look around at the interest in controlling resources on a global scale to find profitable investments, because we have to keep in mind that at the very core of capitalism at large is crisis. Mm-hmm. It is not organized to meet socially determined human needs, and therefore there will always be attempts at some point in trying to maintain some kind of strategic security for the evidence that the world as it is set up is not a very compatible space for them. Mm-hmm. But critical here is remember that in 1974, the U.S. entered into an agreement with Saudi Arabia to denominate oil in dollars, oil transactions, and so on. Yes. So we call it the petrodollar arrangement, and the takeover of Venezuela oil is an attempt to preserve that petrodollar arrangement that has been in deep crisis fundamentally. Mm-hmm. Now, the Trumpian notion that the U.S. will run Venezuela, build up the oil infrastructure and recoup wealth and so on, comes to what some call energy sovereignty through a kind of resource nationalism. And at the same time, the U.S. aim is to hold China, Russia, Iran at bay by disrupting rivals, if you will, right? The move here then is to cut off China's primary source of oil in the region. Global Trumpism, a key factor to take into consideration here, to sort of, if you will, re-invoke the Monroe Doctrine on this principle that the area is the American space. Yeah. Now, Trump believes in this thing what some call an imperialist presidency with presidential absolutism. Any kind of diplomacy is strictly transactional. It is not a question that he doesn't need international law. The only thing that holds is his morality. No, we know there's none there that is being made. So we're seeing in all of this then broadly, let's say, a kind of global realignment, a kind of polarization. They're condemning adversaries because everybody else is lesser than and a threat to them. And then also the fragmentation that we talked that we then is take Trinidad with respect to CARICOM, right? That serves their interest. But countries like Mexico, Brazil, Colombia, and so on see what the U.S. has done and is doing in Venezuela as a violation of sovereignty. In places like Argentina, where you have a right-wing sort of neo-fascist guy like Javier Milei, he says what the U.S. did in Venezuela is welcome. Now, for the Europeans who are caught, in a very difficult position, but they also want to maintain this special relationship with the United States, right? So we are seeing a number of major shifts. Now, if we bring in for a moment Greenland, right? I was reading an interesting piece this morning, and I thought I would bring that, that to your attention.
All right. Can you hold?
Sure.
Let me just take a quick break. It's going to be a very. Yes, Prof. You were talking about the article in reference to Greenland.
Yes. Now, forwarded to me something which the best I could do would be to read that. I don't know if we have a minute or two for me to read it.
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. So it says, if you want to understand why they want Greenland, they are lying. The technocrats really want to be near geothermal power for large data centers and direct rare earth minerals, and put these floating cities, want to set up some floating cities in Greenland and use them as seasteading and charter cities, meaning libertarian. Now, we have a number of billionaires who are at the center of this, right? Because they don't have a lot of investment opportunities at the time, so they want to put these billions there. Now, Elon Musk would get to test his Mars communities with how they will run this project. Already some 50,000 people have signed up to be test monkeys, and in this, a company called Praxis, which is a startup, is involved. We also see a kind of internet native nation or network state project. The aim is to build new cities. They say by this time there are thousands who have expressed interest in this project, if you will. And at the core of it, the ideology is we want to restore or revitalize, quote, Western civilization through a heroic action, advanced technology, and new institutions. They also are talking about global online communities with thousands of citizens, or a reported waiting list with 50,000 people interested in relocating while this thing is built. So you have to think here that what this is addressing is a way to rescue global capitalism from the deepening crisis that we are experiencing. Now, a name like Peter Thiel and
yes.
Sam Altman from Apollo and so on, they have
already gone there. And what's interesting is that cities, because I think out of the catastrophe that happened in Jamaica recently with Hurricane Melissa, that listen, we have to be aware of what's happening around us, and even though they haven't said so, it seems as if there is this thing in the background in terms of we have entire areas that have been decimated by this a hurricane, but it was category 6, and so it destroyed entire areas. And we think that this is a very similar thing that is being planned in terms of the smart cities, because we have already had smart cities announced here in Jamaica. And then I want to connect the Greenland, the stuff you wrote just now you read about Greenland just now and the smart cities. How do you think there's a connection between this and what we're hearing with the Board of Peace and what is about to happen in Gaza?
Gaza is really now the centerpiece of the forward fascist thrust, genocide. And if this then becomes the model, then the question is, where else in the world might they not be trying to do some of these things? Now, there's been some talk about oil being discovered in Gaza, and that the emptying of Gaza through genocide is to facilitate this stuff. Now, you've had Trump's son-in-law talking about this, you've had so on, and there's several things we have to keep in mind. So I don't have any doubt that these things are connected, though it is not clear how they are all connected, but they are. You see, when Trump says he doesn't need international law, that his morality is the only principle he needs to follow, they're saying that the way the world has been run, at least in principle, for the period since at least the end of the Second World War, is over, is the moment. Now, Trump has also indicated that he wants to increase the military budget from $901 billion to $1.5 trillion in 2026. He has also upped the amount of money set aside for anti-immigration projects to $170 billion, and the stocks of companies that these are private prisons. There are a lot of other investors from all other areas under what we call digitalization, or we called it surveillance capitalism, right? This is critical. My friend Bill Robinson has also published a book called The Global Police State, and this sets out clearly what they are after. Humanity at large is in deep trouble. There is a third worldization of middle strata in the so-called North, global South, because there is no way for them to go where they want to go by following the principles of international law. And people in the North who thought that their living standards were guaranteed, no, it is not. The only way we're going to have is to fight this thing from below through the popular forces, because always in recent history, when push comes to shove, a lot of middle strata people have accepted fascism. A lot of those people, and it was the Marxists, the communists, the socialists, the radicals, the revolutionaries who faced down Nazism, right? And that was a movement from below, and we have to be very clear about where we are at this time.
And I really, Bill Robinson also pointed out, and this is something that you said last week in the program also, that there is a crisis of global capitalism, and that the current global instability in the capital system, which is defined by stagnation, over accumulation of capital, and declining profit rates. In such conditions, he said, powerful states and transnational elites increasingly turn to military expansion, resource seizure, and geopolitical domination. Can we talk about that a bit? Because on the one hand, we're saying, so here we have an epochal crisis in global capitalism, but it's also a decisive rupture. It's almost like two competing forces there.
Well, it sounds that way, but it is not that. It is not that as such, because the first thing we keep in mind is that this world capitalist order from its inception has always been influenced by or shaped by instability.
Yes.
The thing is, we have to be clear that what we see before our eyes, there is always something more fundamental. And Bill, my friend Bill has talked about the issues that you raised, indeed, but there's a side to us where we want to see predictability, regularity, normalcy, and not the chaos that is there, right?
Yes.
But since the contradictions, the crisis inheres in capitalism, in a simple point, the simple point is this: capitalism is organized largely around production for profit. Those who own the means of production, the establishment of political orders through the so-called national state that is supposed to bring some form of normalcy and predictability to that particular order. All of that is what has collapsed and continues to collapse before our eyes, right? So we are seeing the multifaceted nature of this crisis. Some aspects of it seem more normal, but at large things are falling apart. When the old is dying, but is not developing and its lineaments have not yet come clearly into sight, that is the intersection here between the two, and the difficulty of processing what is happening and arriving at a sense of clarity, right? That is where we are. But we have to keep our minds open. And Bill is correct to mention the points you talk about: overaccumulation, stagnation, and so forth.
Yes.
And how does the transnational capitalist class, or how do those four address the contradictions? More aggression, more war, more conflict, taking over places. You notice that the European Union countries or the NATO element said that they're not supportive of what Trump wants to do in Greenland. And the French and the Germans said they're sending forces there to help maintain some form of stability, in the autonomous region of Denmark, as it is called, right? Yes. And so we are seeing a lot of. Trump has said, well enough, if it comes to war, he could defeat the Europeans. Well, he's saying down with NATO, down with the way we've done things, because global capitalism in crisis cannot hope to survive without greater belligerency, war, conflict, and threats to global humanity. Dehumanization becomes an integral part of this entire project.
And I want to take one more thing from Bill Comprehensive. He talks about implications of international law and multilateral institutions, where he said the attack on Venezuela, for example, is said to signal the debacle of the post-World War II multilateral structures like the United Nations and international legal norms. It reflects how powerful states can circumvent or ignore legal constraints. But this is where we find ourselves now, because you just referenced NATO. This is NATO against NATO. France sending soldiers in, Denmark sending soldiers in. The United Kingdom this morning, for example, a call for Keir Starmer to not sign off on King Charles visiting America for the 250 anniversary celebration. So we have this kind of format. NATO members against the leading member of NATO. What can be the outcome of that? What's a likely outcome of that?
Well, my thinking is more members, and the United States might be definitely more belligerent, thinking that they can set the standards for global humanity. I am sure that there are transnational capitalist forces in the various NATO countries that don't object to what Trump is doing, but they're not going to be saying that outright. Now, the breakdown of the post-war order and disregard for international law as a feature of that breakdown, right? This comes into violates Article 2.4 of the UN Charter, which prohibits the use of force against sovereignty of another state. Well, that has been the particular principle. But keep in mind something I have said, that sovereignty is being integrated into the global movement of capital. It is not capital taking a secondary position to sovereignty, right? And in this particular moment, then, there are other implications for liberal democracy, bourgeois democracy as we have known it. There is no way for that to hold, right? And once we put these things into perspective, we can understand how the breakdown of, or the departure from multilateralism, the disregard for international law, and the normalization of force, right, as the arbiter for dealing with these particular issues. Remember last week we talked about the a rebalancing,
yes,
right? A rebalancing of the global order. And in these moments, that rebalancing process becomes very chaotic, as it were, right?
Yes.
And so we have to keep in focus that these are not, quote, normal times, that the vocabulary we have relied on to make sense of developments and change in the world is no longer adequate to capture the complexity, the dialectical we are experiencing.
So then even democracy is going to go out with this resetting or rebalancing.
If you look at Gaza, if you look at what Trump did in what they're doing in Venezuela, right? They are only committed to some notion of democracy to the extent that it holds for them. Then Trump says, I do not need international law. The only thing that morality, you know that is an extremely dangerous thing, right?
Yes.
Because the broad mass of people we are in a world where half of the population, global, actually owns nothing, right? And their aim here is to to dislocate. Their aim is to expel. Their aim is to brutalize, because increasingly with the high technology process we're dealing with innovations, robotics, half of the world to produce anything, right? Then Trump came in the... Sorry.
No, we call it here in this space, and I've been calling it, it's not my term, but I kind of picked up on it from 2019, which is to say we're heading towards technocracy and transhumanism. And I think these are the terms that I'm using. When you talk about the vocabulary has to change, I think for me this is helping me to understand what's happening. And it's interesting that in the press release that Trump put out, I think it's on his Truth Social, where he talked about what was about to happen in Gaza. He said we're putting in a technocratic government. And that I found interesting, because this is answering the question of technocracy, or if you want to say feudal technocracy. I know we're still trying to find the right terms, but this seems to be where we're going, especially when you talk about the technology.
Yes. The working principle has been capitalism expands. One expect the growth of something called the middle class. I mean, that's a contradictory term to begin with, because you cannot have some singular middle class in any capitalist society. I don't care where it is, right?
Yes.
But that's the comforting language that people, have been accustomed to. They're saying, forget about all of this. If you assert the principle of international governance, and then that implies you need or will try to put something else in place. But I'm saying that what we have taken over time to be supposedly a human-centered kind of process, it has never really been that in any definitive sense. And as humans become dispensable and disposable, then you take, again, I come back to Gaza, right? Just a wanton destruction. And anytime we talk about the United States, because the United States funds Israel, they get over $3.5 billion a year in aid, which they don't really pay back, and they get the arms and so on from here. So what they're doing in Gaza is what the Trumpism, global Trumpism, approves, supports, and therefore says this is the model for the future. But it doesn't mean because that is their vision, that is their perspective, that is their outlook. This global police state project that Bill talks about, right, tells us where things are.
Yes.
But there's the popular side, which is to fight and to resist this onset against global humanity, right? They can't do it otherwise. Remember, Trump came in 17 and put this woman DeVos in charge of the Department of Education. And the point was, we don't need all this schooling, we don't need all of this education for massive and increasing numbers of people. Let's forget gender. And if they go, look, in the United States today, some of the people who are suffering the most acutely are the MAGA people in all of the white rural districts and other areas where hospitals have been closing, schools closing, radio stations closing, and they're living under some of the most depressing conditions, and yet they think he is a deliverer, right? That is the MAGA base, some 30-something million, and this is the cannon, the fodder for fascism in the United States. All of this stuff of unfolding before our eyes were at the center of global capitalism. The U.S. did more to promote globalization in the interest of transnational capitalist forces than any other place in the world. And now, as it finds itself subject to rules and regulations it helped to spawn, it wants to jettison all of this.
Wow.
That's what Trumpism includes.
Hold the line for me, Prof. A quick break.
Sure.
Sir Hilburn Watson, it is the Africa Forum. We're looking at the geopolitical shifts. We're speaking with those who know, who have been looking at this for ages, for decades, and can call. We talk about the isness of things, Prof. And I suppose this is where we are now. When you left off last week, it's interesting because you talked about the implications for the Caribbean. And I suppose in the next, because we do have just about 15 minutes to go, let's go there to say, what are the implications for the Caribbean? We've got the analyses, we've got, we're observing our people, but we have to move beyond, as I was saying to Vijay Prashad just before you came on, that we have to move beyond the analysis and observing, and then where does that lead us? Where does that take us?
But for us, I mean, the Caribbean, an area of what people call small states, right? They don't set the rules, they don't establish the norms or principles, but it doesn't mean that they have not, these places have not gotten involved at different points in making decisions. You have heard the perspective of Mia Amor Motley, the Prime Minister of Barbados, who has put a great deal of emphasis on climate change, given the impact of these increasingly violent hurricanes, on the region. She has done a lot of that. But the Caribbean area, it does not matter where you begin. Look at the difficulties that Cuba is facing. Trump is saying Cuba has to make a deal or they are next. Right? The Colombia, that he will do what he has to do in this particular regard. So whether it is insular or on the tip of the continent, of South America, we are listening to a rhetoric that does not harbing well for anyone at large. So remember, the Prime Minister of Trinidad came out and said that CARICOM was an unreliable ally, right, in this regard. And bring the big oil companies in. Oil is now being redirected to the United States from Venezuela. This is not something that Caribbean islands can do much about. They have to fight on the plane of international law at the UN and other international bodies. But Trump has already withdrawn the US from more than 50 or 60 international bodies, right? Says we are not being governed by you. Now, the question is, for international law, the collapse of the post-war order, the international order, and so on, the disregard for it, does this mean now that the Caribbean that faces, a harrowing situation? I expect that it will. if you can put, he said that countries that are supporting Russia and China, he's going to put tariffs on them. Well, who pays for the tariffs? The working population in the United States, not the capitalists themselves, right? So if he can unleash terror of this proportion on American working class people at large, what about the people in the Caribbean?
And that is a question, because we're sensing the fear from the top down. It's interesting. The fear is coming from the top down. So governments, when Bruce Golding was on last week, as a former prime minister, obviously he's come out very strong. Point to say the prime minister cannot do that, because if he does, and he's saying what are the consequences, and I see this coming from across the Caribbean. So what is a message? What message is that sending to Caribbean people? Because it seems to me there has to be a response, but also some kind of a proactive creativity and innovation, disruption, if you will, in terms of how we face what is already upon us.
Because this testing us in ways we didn't necessarily anticipate, right? The assumption was that when push comes to shove, international law is going to prevail. For small countries, following the principles of international law, upholding the United Nations system, charter, if you will, and becoming more deeply embedded in institutions that play key roles in global. We have, in the Caribbean, have put our hopes and put much of our resources from New York to the European spaces and so on. With all of this breaking up before our very eyes, there is no clarity about what is going to hold. If Trump were to say tomorrow, if Jamaica were to say we shouldn't attack Cuba, and if Jamaica were to come out on 100% against what is going on in Venezuela, he said, we're going to put a 50%, going to put that on bauxite, right? Who is going to be hurt by any of this? It would be the broad mass of people facing enormous challenges at the very moment. The Prime Minister of St. Lucia was on last night. I was listening to him. We're not about speeches going around the world and giving big speeches. He was talking about me and Motley. Says, every time I go to bed, I ask God to help me to see more clear. I'm looking out for the people of St. Lucia. Well, that's the language of the politician, right?
Yeah, that's very interesting.
Yes, indeed. So you go from territory to territory. When Antigua and others said we were not going to allow the U.S. to set up on their territory what it set up on Trinidad, then you hear a pushback. Well, we're looking at visas for Antiguans and so on.
And Jamaica is now on that list.
And Jamaica is on that list, and Trump has some 75 countries in the world where there are, for the time, interrupting visa processing and whatnot. This includes some European countries, Asian countries, Middle Eastern countries, Western Hemisphere countries,
and Caribbean countries.
Chaotic.
And Prophet, that it includes Jamaica, but what I find Guyana is not on that list. Trinidad and Tobago not there. And interestingly, people are not paying attention to this. The Dominican Republic is not there. And we need to look at, when you talk about drug trafficking, for example, I had a series of programs last year, leading, I think for the entire year last year, leading into this year, until our dear brother Darius Figueroa out of Trinidad got ill. But we were talking about transnational organized crime, and one which is his forte, and one of the places that he came to search was the Dominican Republic. But the Dominican Republic is America's special friend, and Jamaica is in the process of developing a special friendship also with the Dominican Republic. Interestingly, it is not on this list.
Yes, the Dominican Republic is not on the list. Trinidad is not on the list. Guyana is not on the list. I mean, these folks are very clear about who is submissive, who is willing to play their games, and to, what you call here, to Cerberus, the three-headed dog that monitored the gates of hell, right? In legend. And here, so we are seeing aspects of this is not at all surprising. The same you might say in South America, Argentina, to some extent Peru, Paraguay. They always have their friends who they're saying to the rest, look, if you behave nicely, if you follow the rules of the global police state, you will get a SOC. There's no guarantee in any of this, right? So you're right about who is on the list and who is not on the list. But America always says, we have no permanent friends, we have permanent interests.
Yes.
And therefore, anyone that we want to throw under the bus, we might. Look at Delcy Rodriguez in Venezuela today. How much are we hearing about this woman who got the Nobel Peace Prize and so she gave it to Trump? Well, the Nobel Committee said Machado, yes. I mean, she's a grifter, the one who was banned from politics and so on. Right. Then she participated in the move to overthrow Chavez, back in the 90s. So now she had a meeting with Trump, but he's going to say to her, Delcy is our person. Delcy says she wants to work things out with the United States. And the CIA made it clear that it is better to have Chavismo. It would allow for more stability than to go over to this Machado. So she may be under the bus, maybe permanently. They don't need her. She couldn't have predicted this, right, or anything. So the chaos that is reigning is indicative of the deepening crisis and the increasing visibility of the global police state. And those countries are secondary, the Caribbean region, very secondary, if not marginal, in this process.
I see where article closed off with a call for resistance and alternative forces. Yes. He said there should be mass resistance by global working and popular classes as the only force capable of restraining this drift toward militarized global capitalism and to reclaim sovereignty and dignity for peoples worldwide. That's going to take... Yes. Yeah, go ahead.
Yes. Now, after Bill published the Global Police State, he published a program that was launched in London, and I was on the program with him discussing global civil war, right? Yes. So this is about he doesn't, he is a dialectical thinker, and global civil war would be some from the popular forces, right? The popular forces at the broad societal levels. Yeah. I was just reading that right there in Minneapolis, Minnesota, there's a strike planned for the 23rd with the bus drivers and others, popular forces. When popular forces rise in large numbers, they can confront this machinery, right? Yes. Now, people have to be careful out there, because when the global police state put forces, they put people with lethal weapons, right? They are not opposed to unleashing terror. And remember that this fascist thinking Stephen Miller, who is an advisor to Trump, he is urging him to invoke the the insurrection for a long time, right? Yes. And there have also been some discussion for a few years that the Republicans in Congress have been behind arming their supporters in the various states. Yes. We haven't heard of any Democrats talking openly about that. But if you come out into the street with popular power and they come out with their bazookas and with their this and their whatever, they might have an advantage. But we have to insist that becomes critical in confronting this massive antisocial top-down fascist strategy that is more clearly articulated in the United States and under Trump than we had seen it before.
Wow, we're going to leave it there. Thank you so much Professor Hilburn Watson. As usual, food for thought. And we appreciate your perspectives, your deep thinking on these matters. Thank you so much. Yes, we'll talk soon because you know we're going to be calling up on you again.
Of course.
We're giving you a week off.
Forward.
Yes.
Thank you.
All right, 21. Running Africa, and our next guest is online, Charles Hyatt Jr., Charles Hyatt III, IT professional, DJ, husband, father, holds a Master's of Science in Information Technology from Bauer State University in Maryland and a Bachelor of Science in Health Science from Lincoln University in Pennsylvania. Wide scope of interest, including the African continent in its geopolitical context. And this is the side of him that we're tapping into this morning, as we say, Watchman, what of the night? Good morning, Charles. How are you doing?
Good morning, Kabu, and your listeners. Good morning to everybody.
You're very, very low, and I have everything turned up just a little bit better. I know you're in a place where you're 3 hours behind us, right?
Behind.
So it could be a matter of you just waking up. But,
let's see, is this better?
not really. Why is it that we're not hearing Charles? I'm hearing you though, you're clear.
I'm
so
right up on the phone,
Yes, you are clear, so we're hearing you clearly. It's just that it's low, and I think our listeners will be able to turn up their whatever it is that they're listening to. There's no static. So I think we can go with it. I said what of the night, and I'm not joking because we're looking at continental Africa, and what a time! What a time! What are the big stories coming out over the last few weeks for you, Charles?
All right. Well, let's start with one of the biggest stories right now in Africa, which is Senegal takes on Morocco in the final of the AFCON. So that's going to be today at 11 o'clock my time, which is 2 o'clock Eastern time. I believe that's going to be 2 o'clock Jamaica time. Mm-hmm. So a lot of people are looking to see Senegal repeat. Mm-hmm. And we'll see how that turns out. Now, when you talk about geopolitical, I believe the two biggest stories on the African continent right now are, of course, the Ugandan election.
Yes, of course.
Has won officially with 75% of the vote. Mm-hmm. But it is a serious contest going on in that election because Bobby Wine, who is the biggest contender, is the people's president. There's no doubt about it. And there has been, there's been some exposing of normal things. Prior to the election, all electricity, all internet, everything went out. Bobby Wine was put under house arrest. From what I'm getting from sources, he escaped house arrest, and he has been making some public statements as he's on the run. But
I notice he's also on the social media because he's tweeting. He's on X.
Yes, yes, yeah. And so they're trying to lock. We're going to have to watch that. See how that turns out, because it has been getting more and more violent. Few people have lost, not few people, a good amount of people have lost their lives in clashes with the military forces and so on and so forth. So we have to watch that very closely.
Are you in any way surprised that the African Union came out so quickly to say, free and fair? Well, congratulations.
Absolutely not surprised, because we know that the African Union is a puppet, a group of puppets for the imperial forces from the West, and so they would they would say what they're saying,
Mm-hmm,
right?
mm-hmm.
Now, there is a caveat to that, because we also understand that bit, because Human Rights Watch
Mm-hmm.
and I cannot remember the name of the organization.
Amnesty, is it Amnesty?
No, not Amnesty International.
Transparency.
It's like Alpha.
All right,
Anyway,
we'll come up with it in time.
We'll go back to
Yes.
that. We'll come back to
Yeah.
They all support Bobby Wine. So and we know the controversy.
Oh, I see what you
Human
mean.
Rights
Yes,
Watch
yes,
and-
yes.
So so it is right. We don't really know which way it's going. We know that Museveni is obviously has tried to hold on to power. We just don't know if it is for the development of Uganda, or if it is for his own playground. I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah, we're watching this one. Museveni has become a tyrant, and the other side, on the other side, it's Bobby Wine, who is controlled by the West, and yeah.
What a choice.
Yeah.
Now, it's interesting how African news works. Right now, regardless of what governments are doing, one of the most impactful things happening in the African continent right now is a young man named Aisho Speed that has decided to go to 30 countries in 30 days. By far one of the largest followers online, period. His stream is having like 49 million viewers, right? As he goes from different countries in Africa, on the African continent. And it is, I mean, you're seeing reaction videos to this man's stream, this young boy's stream, of especially from Black America. They told us about Africa. Look at how beautiful the place is. Look at how wonderful the people are. And I mean, it is changing. It is wiping out the narrative of the image of Africa to the West.
African people, whether you're coming in study groups or others, to come in and claim that you are the original Egyptians, and that the Africans started this civilization. So these are the Arabs who came just the other day, because remember, we have dynasties going long before time.
Absolutely.
And so the Arabs who came in just the other day, they came in after the Hyksos. They just came the other day. And they are now claiming that it's their civilization. And so for African people who go in, I've been there and seen massive shows, for example, canceled with Black American artists, because the artists probably said, we're ancient Egyptians. So it is now an offense to do that. And I'm not surprised that he has been attacked or disciplined, this is how they call it, in Egypt. Not surprised at all. And just for all of us who are going in, remember that this is now the thinking in Egypt, that if you're coming to claim your Africanness and to claim Egypt as Kemet, then you're likely to be met with resistance.
Yeah, but it is interesting. All of that resistance, and I'm just going to say it unapologetically, the world is crumbling right now. And I am telling you that the only way this world will be fixed is when they start to recognize the importance and the power of Black people. And,
there you go.
They're fighting very hard, and they have some Black puppets that are also in the fight to keep down the image and the rightful place of Black people.
Because they've seen the truth.
Because they know the truth.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And it is unfortunate that they're going to have to go through this teething era and time, because the power of Black people will be felt. Period.
Yeah.
And it is the only thing that is going to help the world. But anyway.
Yeah.
Let me go on to other news. something that's surprising is happening in Botswana. The people are starting to question Domabaku.
Oh, really?
So, yes, because they're saying they in Botswana, you know, that their democracy is really, 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 really tight and very good. They have decades of success in having a democracy, right? But the people are saying, wait a minute. The statement that is the most important or most popular right now is, quote, we are not hungry for fashion. We are hungry for development.
Oh.
They're saying that Domabaku is now taking on an image, changing his accent and dressing in very expensive clothes and boots and making great speeches, but they're not seeing the tangible change in Botswana. And Botswana is a country where they'll vote him out quick.
It's interesting because I named him this morning as one of the examples of what can and is happening on the continent of Africa. So very interesting.
And it is, you're right to say that, because he is, you have to understand that when it comes to governments and policies and procedures, not everything is publicly available as to what is happening. And Domabaku is renegotiating the diamond deal because what is the name of the company?
Beers? De Beers?
Yes. Yes, De Beers. Previously, Botswana was only getting 3% of royalties from their diamond industry. He has decided to renegotiate that so that the majority percentage goes to Botswana, because it is their resources and it's their people who are doing the work and so on and so forth. So there's going to be, his speech is that the the renegotiation will be seen in development through hospitals and schools and infrastructure and such. But the ink isn't dry yet. And so that is why the change hasn't started to come. But you know, De Beers is fighting it tooth and nail. But he's doing things in the background. But people are saying, we want to see development now. And that's where he's coming up on a problem. Now, to flip that, and I know we only have a few more minutes, but over in the Sahel, that's what Africa is looking at to say we want to see development now. Because over in the Sahel, even though renegotiations and, you know, all the type of coup plots and the terrorism happening, they're actually developing, right? One of the examples that in Burkina Faso, this landlocked country has now built a fish farm industry, and they have been giving building infrastructure for farmers to begin. What they want them to do is to sell 100 tons of fish locally grown. Now you can imagine what that's going to do as far as economy is concerned, right?
Jamaica can take a lesson from that, because we have been, our fishermen are being denied access to the sea where they have fished for centuries, decades.
You know, when it comes to Jamaica, I am going to let you talk about it. Because if I start,
we're dealing with continental Africa now. Stop bringing in Jamaica. It's continental Africa.
The failures of our government to do right by the people.
Mm-hmm.
The list is endless.
And it is interesting because the Prime Minister just said, in response to all that's happening with the United States and the geopolitical shifts and as Imani Tafari Amma is writing about today in the newspapers, the piracy, that development is what he's looking at, and that we have all to be a part of that. And my question is, how do you develop without access to fresh water, access to land, and access to your coast, to the sea? You have denied fishermen access to fish. How you are going to feed yourself? You have denied Jamaicans access to fresh water in many, many places. We have lost almost all of our rivers. And you have denied access to the sea. But you say we must develop. We have to look inward and develop. It's not possible. Anyway,
it's not possible. It's not probable. And anyway, let's go back to Africa.
Yes, Africa. We want to go.
Benin.
Mm-hmm.
In Benin, Mamdi Doumbouya is the new president of Benin, and I'm sorry, not Benin, Guinea.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting that Assimi Goïta from the Sahel went to the inauguration. Now, their friendship goes back years, and it was his way of showing that, look here, Mali and Guinea are the same people, right? And he's making sure because he went there in regular traditional dress, and usually he's in his military uniform.
Yes.
But he went in regular civilian dress, and it was quite nice to see the camaraderie between the two, because we understand that there might be a problem in Guinea, but based on Western influence.
Of course, yes.
Assimi Goïta wanted to show that, look, we are family before we are friends, and that was a great symbol. The people in Guinea really appreciated his presence and showed him a lot of love, and that's wonderful.
Yeah,
it was good to see.
So we're hopeful because of what we see happening in the Sahel in particular, and also in places in West Africa. We're pretty hopeful. Africa, I think, is the on the cusp of being what it can be and what it is. We talk about Africa awaits its creators and its creation, but especially because of the geopolitical shifts that we're seeing now and the upheavals, Africa is at the center of a lot of it. But if Africa can move without begging bowls and without bills of sale, because this isn't the thing that they're saying now. They're going to the Africa Union and they're going to the World Economic Forum with bills of sale. What are you selling? An interesting way of putting things, interesting phrase. But so if we can move without bills of sale and without begging bowls, then I think we are in the renaissance that we have been talking about for the last few years.
Kabu, I believe that Africa, based on what we're seeing happening geopolitically, I think it is understood, especially from China and Russia, that Africa is being built into the next consumer economy. And the second manufacturing hub We know that China is number one. But I believe that the African continent is being built into the second manufacturing hub because of the BRICS alliance. And they're doing that to move away from the West. Now, the West is doing a great job to move people from that, but that's another discussion.
That's another discussion, and we'll have that. And we'll have that discussion. We're expecting you to come into Jamaica shortly, and we need. We're going to ask you to put on another hat when you come in, because we want to talk about reggae music as revolutionary liberation music, and what is happening to reggae music within the context of who retuned the nation. And it's something we've been saying in this space for a very long time. I've had discussions with you on this also, and I know that you yourself have concerns about what appears to be the demise of the liberationary, and you said it last time you were on, liberationary, revolutionary music that is reggae.
Right. Yeah. Again, our passport is the most important asset as far as world is concerned. When people see a Jamaican passport, and I'm telling you from personal experience, everything changes. And the question I get most when I'm traveling overseas is, what is Jamaica waiting on? What are you doing? What are you doing? Because we're waiting for more freedom fighters and more news in your music and more revolution in your music. But what's happening? And I it's a long discussion. I've had it in many airports.
Yes.
So I look forward to having.
I know. Interestingly, we had this discussion waiting for the ferry. You remember? From the airport in Sierra Leone to, because we're about to take the ferry from the airport right to the hotel.
Yeah, to Freetown.
Yeah, to Freetown, and we had this discussion. We were so tired, but we were kind of trudging through this conversation. Do you remember?
Of course.
Yeah, that was quite something.
So I look forward, because I have lots of thoughts on that. So I look forward to coming in and sitting and discussing this with you.
All right.
And your listeners, for
right.
sure.
Well, make sure you're here for the first week in February. The Minister of Tourism and Cultural Affairs. I don't know if I should be announcing anything, but it was said on the program before. So, Professor Rosalie Hamilton, you did say it before. I will say it one more time since that. Will be on the island here in Jamaica. And so she'll be here for the first week in February. So you should be here. Well, maybe not the whole. You should come the end of the month, not the first week in February, or else you're not going to see her. I'm just saying.
Well, let's see how that works.
Yeah,
It would be wonderful to be able to see everything.
Come next week, man. His name Charles Hyatt III. Jump on a plane and come. Next week. I mean, Tuesday.
Yeah, man. Got it. Yes.
We'll see you soon. Thank you so much, my brother. Did we wrap for now for continental Africa, the big stories?
Well, one other story, or two other stories.
Yeah.
It is interesting what is happening with Starlink in Africa. They're getting banned from country after country. Shut down their satellites completely.
Right.
South Africa is banning them from coming in. And even countries in West Africa are saying we'd rather go with an Africa-born satellite company to connect to Afrinet. You know about Afrinet?
Yes,
the
yes.
African internet. And so Starlink is getting a lot of battering in Africa. And I think it's a great thing because where he's playing a fear-mongering game where he's saying white people are being persecuted in Africa just so that he can get Donald Trump to be stupid.
Right.
But that doesn't take anyway.
To take up his grandfather's legacy, Elon Musk's grandfather's legacy, as you know, his grandfather is one of the developers of creators of technocracy.
Yes. You have to
so discussion again. We'll pick up on that. We have so much to talk about when you come in.
Yeah, that is true.
Yes.
Now, North Korea has started to sound out on Togo. That Togo is housing the main character or the main plotter in the attempted coup in Burkina Faso, Damiba. And because that's where North Korea is saying, please don't get us involved in this thing. You need to hand over this man or we're coming. And
so why is North Korea, why North Korea?
Because of BRICS.
Okay.
Because of BRICS.
Okay.
Yeah, because of BRICS. IMF is under fire in West Africa as Ghana is moving away from it. Ghana is creating situations where it is being self-reliant. It is becoming self-reliant. It is paying off its oil. It is using. It has created a anti-smuggling task force to get rid of Galamsey, which is the illegal industry of gold smuggling. The Ghana CD is rising, which is reducing the dependence on IMF loans, and the IMF is not happy.
Yeah, I can just imagine.
Now, one of the things we can say is, and we see it, what happened in Venezuela, a country's sovereignty is based on how much that country can defend itself, right?
Yes.
Military power. I was absolutely happily floored, to see the delivery of, I don't know, maybe I think it was 60 or 70 ICBMs delivered to Burkina Faso last week, of weapons that can reach other continents. Right? Which sends a great message to say,
ancestors, please protect Burkina Faso and Ibrahim Traore, because let us whisper that news and leave it right there. Oh, good Lord. Yeah. My brother, thank you so much. We're watching the continent of Africa, and we're not just watching. I think as I should recognize what our roles and responsibilities are in that process there, and be a part of that. Africa indeed awaits its creators and its creation, but it arises anyway. So make we do what we have to do. Thank you so much, Charles.
Yeah, man, my pleasure, and thank you, Kabo.
All right. Say hi to Big A's right here.
Hey, Big A.
Charles Hyatt the third. We're going with the third, Big A. The second.
Yeah. I'm the second, yeah.
He says, oh, yes, that's true. Right, so Charles Hyatt the first, so Charles Hyatt the second. Anyway, Big A, say hello. You hear him?
We have to include Big A in the reggae music conversation, yeah.
Man, you talk that out and me not telling me that next thing you now go come at all, you know. And we already have him slotted in nicely, you know. If you don't mash up him, I'll lead the conversation. And this is interesting, you know, that you're going to say it out now anymore, so we discuss it without him. You were there from it's a triumvirate. Don't it? Julius Caesar, Cassius, and Brutus. I ain't taking on any of those names.
Last time I was on. So
I know, yeah. All right. Thank you so much, Charles. We'll see you later.
My pleasure. All right. One love.
Give thanks. And this is how we say goodbye for today as we make way for the Big A.